back to Waiting in Laodicea. I'm your host, A.T. Martinez. And before we get into today's message, I want to tell you about a little change that's going to be happening here on Waiting in Laodicea. We're going to continue giving you six somewhat mini episodes, 15, 20 minutes long or so, maybe even as much as 30 minutes, Monday through Saturday. Also with this, though, we're going to start adding larger episodes. So that way I can cover things that are going to take a little bit more time. And today will be the first of these issues, or these segments. And this segment actually may end up going into multiple days. We're going to have to wait and see. It's going to depend on how the Lord leads and how this goes forward. I do hope you'll be patient with me. I hope you enjoyed today's show, and thank you. Today I want to talk to you about how the church has been changing. Now, things change all the time. Every now and again you get new understanding of what different verses mean, and different ideas come to you to make things a little better. But this is not the type of change that I'm talking about. I'm talking about when the church, or denominations within the church actually, decide that certain doctrines and certain beliefs that are in the Bible are no longer applicable. Now, case in point, in my lifetime, there's been several rather huge changes in aspects of certain denominations. The first change was allowing women ministers. Now, I don't have anything personally against women. I think women can teach just as well as others. But the Bible does quite clearly state a woman isn't supposed to be a preacher. Now, many churches have decided that's an outdated parochial view based on, the male hierarchy and so on and so forth, and they've decided to allow women preachers. Some people enjoy going to churches that have women preachers. Some people don't. I'm not going to take a side on this. What I am going to say is I don't think that this was done because the church saw some divine revelation and some understanding of that this was wrong. What they did see is a large group of people out there who said Christianity is wrong because it's sexist. And so they altered the belief of their denomination. Now, again, back less than 20 years ago, well, I could figure it out, but we could sit down. I'm sure you know when it happened too. Many churches, many denominations decided that since gay people were now allowed to be married under the law, they should be allowed to be married in the church. And this prompted several of them to start performing same-sex marriages. Now, even the Catholic Church has undergone a revision somewhat of their views on homosexuality in the church. They've decided that there needs to be a greater opportunity for homosexuals to serve in the church. So far, they have not come out and said that they would allow homosexuals to be married in the church. That's still against Catholic dogma. But what we're seeing is that the church, even the Catholic Church, especially under Pope Francis, is opening its doors a little bit more to more progressive views. Now, generally, the idea of making your religion or your beliefs more open to what the society says or what a large group of people say, because overall, it isn't society that is saying these things. Gay marriage does not have an overwhelming support when it goes to the polls. It tends to lose. So, what is happening? What is happening is that churches are deciding to become more popular. Being a Christian is losing some of its allure to a lot of people, especially young people. Now, the problem with changing your beliefs to fit the world is that's not what we're supposed to do, regardless of how popular it is. Now, we can see this first off by watching what Christ did. When Christ got to Jerusalem and he went to the temple, he saw what was a very popular practice at that time, where you had money changers and people selling doves for the sacrifices. His response, well, we can see his response in the 21st chapter, I believe it is. 21st chapter of
Matthew 21 verses 12 to 17. Reading from the New King James Version. Jesus cleanses the temple. Then Jesus went into the temple of God and drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he said to them, It is written, My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. Then the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and scribes saw the wonderful things that he did, and the children crying out in the temple and saying, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were indignant and said to him, Do you hear what these are saying? And Jesus said to them, Yes. Have you never read, Out of the mouth of babes and nursing infants you have perfected praise? Then he left them and went out of the city to Bethany, and he lodged there.
So Christ didn't accept the idea of having these people inside the temple grounds. Outside the temple grounds, he would have said nothing. But inside the temple, that is property that was given directly to God. So I know this is not a big issue here when it comes to changing your dogma or your beliefs to fit the views of others, but it shows you how even a simple thing was not acceptable. Now, just because something is popular doesn't make it right. Remember, historically, a lot of things have been popular that were not right. At one point, popular view was that the sun revolved around the earth. That was proven false. Popular view had it that slavery was acceptable, and morally nothing was wrong with it. We now no longer hold that view. Now we're seeing a new area. Two articles have come up, and many of you may have seen some of them. One of them was addressing the fact that the Catholic bishops in the United States are going to hold their annual meeting. And in this meeting, they were going to talk about the idea of allowing politicians, especially those politicians that are advocates for increasing access to abortion, to still be given communion. Now, communion, or the Lord's Supper, is one of the religious rites that is especially important in the Catholic Church. Part of in order to take communion correctly, you're supposed to be clear of sin. You're supposed to make sure your heart and your mind is in the right place with God. But to do otherwise is extremely dangerous. So, when you see that the conclave of bishops are discussing the possibility of not allowing certain politicians the right to have communion anymore, what they're basically stating is one step less than basically kicking them out of the church, excommunicating them. The two key politicians that this covers, that is being talked about, are, of course, Nancy Pelosi and Joseph Biden, both of which profess their belief that they are Catholics. They have claimed many times to be regular attenders of Catholic masses. But the problem is their viewpoints don't hold with Catholic doctrine. Under Catholic doctrine, what they're doing is promoting direct evil. Abortion, in the Catholic viewpoint, is evil. And by having these politicians say they are Catholics but yet still promote evil, the bishops felt that this was sending out a wrong message. Now, both of these people have not just said that abortion is a right, but they've gone out of their way to increase access. They want to supply public funds for it. Biden, within his first days of office, eliminated an executive order from Trump prohibiting the use of federal dollars to pay for abortions overseas. Now, granted, this is a standard practice amongst Democrats, and just as the opposite is true under the Republicans. Republican president gets in, first thing he does, he passes an executive order to prohibit the spending of federal tax dollars to provide abortions overseas. Democrat gets in, gets rid of it. Now, right now in the United States, there was a law in effect that prohibited spending federal money on abortions. Biden has, along with Obama, agreed that Obamacare should cover abortions. So he is working very hard to expand the access to free abortions. He also is a very staunch supporter of Planned Parenthood, as is Nancy Pelosi. Now, many supporters of Planned Parenthood say, well, they provide other services. Nationally, they rarely supply other services. But even if every one of their offices provided more services than just abortions, by giving them funding for these other services and allowing them to receive federal funds, that allows those agencies to be able to basically use the money to help lower their costs so that they can provide their abortions cheaper or even in some cases for free. Because that Planned Parenthood does make money from other donations and other sources. That money then can solely go towards helping kill billions of babies. Now, the bishops were all set to say no more. If you're going to continue advocating for evil, we will not be granting you the ability to have communion. What happened? Rome has sent a letter. One of the cardinals there has sent a letter saying to attack such public figures as, they didn't specifically state, from what I read, Nancy Pelosi's name or Joseph Biden's name, but to attack such public figures could very possibly divide the church, meaning the Catholic Church. Okay, so what you have here is you have one group of people that are actually out to uphold their particular views, or as they're seeing it, they're going to stand up for Christ. They're going to stand up for their beliefs and what Christianity says. And now you have another part of that same organization, the Catholic Church, that is saying, but we ought to be careful because we don't want to hurt somebody's feelings because it might split the church. Well, here's a problem. The Catholic Church is already split on this issue. And when it comes down to, if you morally believe that abortion is murder, to sit there and be afraid of splitting the church over fear of labeling something as murder, you're hiding from the truth. Not only are you hiding from the truth, you're not allowing yourself or your people to stand up for their beliefs. Now, we as Christians are expected to stand up for our beliefs, even to the point of going to our own cross, to die for our beliefs. So what is this showing us? This is showing us, at least in the Catholic Church at the moment, that they can't decide if they want to stand up for their beliefs or whether they want to cave to public pressure. Now, if you stand up for your beliefs, who are you standing up against? What are you standing up for? First and foremost, you need to know what you believe. Now, I personally don't believe abortion is moral. I do believe it is murder. Therefore, to have people advocating for abortion, to me, is wrong. But If your particular beliefs don't say that's wrong, it's a different subject. As a Christian, though, you need to look and see what the Bible says on the subject. Now, any subject, regardless of whether it's abortion, same-sex marriage, women preachers, you name it, what the public says is irrelevant. If you're going to stand up for your beliefs, you know what you believe, and you stand up for them. You say, no, I'm not going to accept this. Remember, I've told you how the Equality Act is going to be used to force Christian doctors to perform surgeries they don't believe in. It can be used to force Christian doctors to perform abortions or even, sex change operations. The question is, are those doctors going to be willing to do so? Or are they going to stand up for their beliefs? Now, I've said in other episodes that this was the beginning volleys in an attack on Christianity. And trust me, it is. Because the next step that they're going to do is they're going to tell us that it's wrong or make it illegal for a church to not have joint unisex bathrooms. There's already a push for this. That a man could walk into a woman's restroom and at your church, and that should be perfectly acceptable because he identifies as a woman. Now, I don't know about you all, but I'm like, no, that ain't going to happen. Especially when my daughter was very little. I didn't want no man walking in on the bathroom on her because there's some weird people out there. That we allow weird people into our church, of course we do. That's where you want to have them come so that they can learn about God. So, what happens when the government starts coming after the churches? What happens when the government starts coming after your business? Are you going to stand up for your beliefs? Now, in standing up for your beliefs, like I said, you have to know what you believe. And second, you have to realize there are a lot of people out there who are going to do everything they can to confuse the issue. The Bible is full of messages about denying Christ and denying your beliefs. Now, it's interesting that if you look at the story of the Bible, in the first four books of the New Testament, the Gospels, every single one of the Gospels has a reference to how Peter betrayed Christ 3 times. Now, we're going to go ahead and take a look at Luke's version because I think Luke's version is the most complete. But as I say this, understand that you could also go to Matthew 26, verses 69 through 75. You can go to Mark 14, verses 66 to 72. You can go to John chapter 18, verses 15 through 18.
Luke 22. Reading from the New King James Version. Peter denies Jesus, and weeps bitterly. Starting in verse 54. Having arrested him, they led him and brought him into the high priest's house. But Peter followed at a distance. Now when they had kindled a fire in the midst of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. And a certain servant girl, seeing him as he sat by the fire, looked intently at him and said, "This man was also with him." But he denied him, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And after a little while another saw him and said, "You also are of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." Then after about an hour had passed, another confidently affirmed, saying, "Surely this fellow also was with him, for he is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are saying." Immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So Peter went out and wept bitterly.
All right. We've all heard the story. Now you've read the story along with us. Peter is asked, "Aren't you with Christ?" And he says, "Never heard of him." Now, how many times during your day do you answer the same way? Now, I'm sure it's not as cut and dry and black and white for many of you. But let me give you an example. You're out with your friends, and one of them starts talking about what they'd like to do with the girl down. Ooh, look at that girl. She's so good. And I said, "Would you like?" Then they, do you see what I'm trying to say? Your friend is saying it. Then he turns to you and say, "Wouldn't you like to do that too?" Right here is where you're being asked to choose. Are you going to stand up for God, or are you going to go along to get along? There are many times in our lives where our friends and our peers and those that we know ask us, "You want to do this? You want to do that? What do you think of this?" And instead of turning to them and saying, "No, that's not right according to my beliefs," we tend to have a tendency as humans to sit there and go, "Yeah, that would be kind of fun." The other way we tend to forget to stand up for the Lord is, those are the little things, those are the things that we don't even look at. But what about the things that are really important? Are we going to stand up whenever they want to make something legal? Now remember, as you're sitting there and you're thinking of your answers, we can see historically quite a few people have not stood up. The church was not standing up when the debate over homosexual marriage came around. Yes, in California, which is where a lot of it started, the measure to make it legal for gays to marry was defeated. But this was defeated after the government had already allowed it. So the courts said you can't give a right, then immediately take it away. Too many times we as Christians have sat back and said, "Well, that's not the most vital thing." When you give an inch, you give a mile. First it's this, then it's that, then it's that. Look at society around us. Now, I've pointed out to you how it's changed so dramatically in my lifetime alone. I remember listening to music and when I was a teenager, and having certain songs have a word or two bleeped on the radio because they wouldn't allow that to be said. I can remember how on television a lot of things were not done. U.S. television especially, nudity was not allowed. Even partial nudity. They had to be very careful with what they did. And they had to be careful of the message they were sending with it. A bad guy, it was okay to show him, basically, jumping bed to bed to bed to bed. But somebody who was supposed to be the good guy wasn't supposed to do that. Now, today, the limits on what is seen is almost non-existent. There's still, you still got your PG ratings and your general rating and your X rating and your R ratings. But what constitutes an R now, back when I was a kid, would have been an X. I mean, I remember you never saw James Bond take clothes off somebody. No, he didn't cross that line. The other thing is, I remember as a kid watching the old black and white movies, the adventures, of Earl Flynn as he was Robin Hood or Captain Blood or so on and so forth. And what was interesting in all of those shows is you would have the hero basically go through hell, and all he got for it, if he was lucky, was a single kiss. That magic kiss that motivated him to go beyond. Well, today, they would basically take that kiss, and that kiss would, as she drops her dress. Whether they show any of the woman's anatomy is irrelevant. They've already demonstrated to you what he is going to get paid. They have taken something that used to be special and made it cheaper. And we live in a society where this is the way things are everywhere. And why is that? Because we as Christians did not stand up for our beliefs. When they wanted to change things and make things more liberal, as they put it, more progressive as it is, we sat back and said, well, we can always change the channel. Well, nowadays, if you want to change the channel to not watch what my mother would blatantly call filth, you've got a problem. Most of your channels are playing the same filth. The number of Christian channels out there, or channels that play deep, good family-related shows, are very slim. I can only think of 2 or 3, and 2 of those play reruns. Reruns of shows from the 60s and 70s, some of the 80s. But what happened? What happened is we didn't stand up. Now, we were warned in the Bible this was going to happen. We were also warned in the Bible there were going to be people that are going to lead us astray, and who would be able to try to sway even the elect into going different directions. And those people have taken over. There are false prophets everywhere you look, both in the government, out of the government, in our churches, all telling us we need to go along to get along. And the question is, are we going to stand up for our beliefs? Too often the answer is we're not. Understand, though, this is the beginning of the end of times. And as such, those of us who do not stand up for our beliefs now are most likely not going to stand up for our beliefs later. We're going to be swayed into believing that the Antichrist is actually Christ, the Messiah returned. If we can sit there and say, well, just because it's an iniquity, they weren't really talking about this. If that's the way we're going to look at things now, imagine what it's going to be like when the person who's making the claims is performing miracles. When the person making the claim comes back from the dead and the whole world sees it. It's going to be harder and harder to stand by your beliefs. Now, it's not easy right now to stand up for your beliefs. Too often, you might get laughed at, you might get ridiculed, you may even lose friends over it. If you tell certain people, no, I don't believe your actions are correct, if they ask you, no, number one, they shouldn't have asked you if they're not prepared for your honest answer. So you should be able to turn to them and say, no, I'm sorry, I think you're born a man or you're born a woman, and that's what it is. You can't change it. Science says, once a man, always a man. Once a woman, always a woman. The idea that a man can have a period. No, actually, he can't. A woman can have a period, because that is a biological aspect of being a woman. But a man, I'm sorry, the biology isn't there. To see it otherwise is against science. It's against the nature of God. God put us in this world as something, and we need to ascribe to that. So, you might lose your friends over some of this. You stand up for your beliefs, and you might find yourself out of a friend. I'll give a very good example. My children, all their lives, there's been another family that we've they've basically grown up with. They're a boy and a girl. The girl has decided that she is now a guy. Well, first she said she was a lesbian. And there was some criticism of that by my mother and others. But more or less, everybody's like, okay, that's your choice. We can't stop you. But we also did make it quite clear that that's not exactly, according to the Bible, the way you're supposed to behave. The Bible does kind of frown on this. So we did not lie, and we were not hypocrites about it, but we still love the young lady, and we told her that. Now she has decided that she identifies as a guy, and is involved with another female who identifies as a guy. So now she's a lesbian who thinks she's gay. I don't get it. She knows I don't get it. I don't. She told me that I'm supposed to call her another name, that that's the name she's chosen, and I've told her that I've known her whole life, and I will continue to call her by the name that she was given when she was born. And I don't mean it to be disrespectful. Mainly, it's out of habit. She is who I see she is. And although one of my sons still has changed his vocabulary, calls her a different name, uses a male pronoun for her, I don't. And I don't do it out of a sense of rudeness. I don't do it because, to me, she's still the little girl that used to come over and play with my kids. Now, luckily for both of us, neither of us blames the other for our views. I'm not going to sit there and tell her I hate her, because I don't. I still love her deeply. She is a friend of my family and will always be. And I will always pray for her. But I do believe that she is not living her life according to the Bible. And she'll tell me she knows that she's not. This, in other situations, can cause a total mess. People will families will break apart over this very issue. If your son came home and told you he was gay, in many Christian houses, that would be tantamount to saying, I'm moving out and never talking to you again, because you're going to kick me out anyway. Now, I'm not here telling you that to stand up for your beliefs means you got to kick your son out or your daughter and treat them in any way that is negative. But it does mean you need to make sure that they know that no, you don't think that what they're doing is right. And at least not according to the Bible. And what happens from there is, well, the Bible tells us we're still supposed to love them. So we should love these people. But too many times people either will meet them with hate or not stand up for their own beliefs. Now, the rise of the false prophets are everywhere. When you look up false prophets and false teachings in the Bible, you're going to get a lot of input. Now, we're going to cover a few of those inputs today. We still have time. We're going to start off by going back to our original verse, what I look at as the instructions for waiting in Laodicea. And that is found in Matthew chapter 24. And this is part of, hopefully I'll pronounce this right, the Olivine Discourse. This is where Christ was asked, what about the end of days? And part of that discussion...
Matthew 24. Reading from the New King James Version. Starting in verse 21. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, Look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand.
Okay, that was Matthew, and he's talking about the rise of the false prophets that will even lead the elect astray. Now, I'm going to go ahead and bring out all the rest of the recordings, and then we'll go through each of the recordings, probably in another episode, because by this point we've already reached real close to our 45-minute to an hour time frame. So later on, the next episode, we're going to actually cover all these chapters and all these verses and see how they apply to our discussion of standing up for our beliefs. But I want to go ahead and get these verses out because they are very, very important. All right, the verses that we're going to be seeing is 2 Peter chapter 2. We're going to go back to Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 through 20. Then we're going to go to the 2 John. And the neat thing about 2 John, there's no chapter, there's only one. And we're going to be looking at verses 7 through 11. Finally, we'll be going to 1 John, starting in chapter 4, starting in verse 1. So let's go ahead and see what these different... Oh, almost forgot Titus. Titus chapter 1, verses, I believe it's 10 to 16. We're going to go ahead and look at all of these, and when we return in our next episode, we will go through these verses. Yes, I'll play them again so that you can be refreshed. But that way, we can all see.
2 Peter 2. Reading from the New King James Version. Destructive doctrines. But there were also false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who bought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their destructive ways, because of whom the way of truth will be blasphemed. By covetousness they will exploit you with deceptive words, for a long time their judgment has not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber. Doom of false teachers. Continuing in verse 4. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly, and delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked, for that righteous man, dwelling among them, tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. Then the Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptations and to reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who walk according to the flesh in the lust of uncleanness and despise authority. They are presumptuous, self-willed. They are not afraid to speak evil of dignitaries, whereas angels, who are greater in power and might, do not bring a reviling accusation against them before the Lord. Depravity of false teachers. Continuing in verse 12. But these, like natural brute beasts made to be caught and destroyed, speak evil of the things they do not understand, and will utterly perish in their own corruption, and will receive the wages of unrighteousness, as those who count it pleasure to carouse in the daytime. They are spots and blemishes, carousing in their own deceptions while they feast with you, having eyes full of adultery and that cannot cease from sin, enticing unstable souls. They have a heart trained in covetous practices, and are accursed children. They have forsaken the right way and gone astray, following the way of Balaam the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness, but he was rebuked for his iniquity. A dumb donkey speaking with a man's voice restrained the madness of the prophet. These are wells without water, clouds carried by a tempest, for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. Deceptions of false teachers. Continuing in verse 18. For when they speak great swelling words of emptiness, they allure through the lusts of the flesh, through lewdness, the ones who have actually escaped from those who live in error. While they promise them liberty, they themselves are slaves of corruption, for by whom a person is overcome, by him also he is brought into bondage. For if, after they have escaped the pollutions of the world through the knowledge of the Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ, they are again entangled in them and overcome, the latter end is worse for them than the beginning. For it would have been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness, than having known it, to turn from the holy commandment delivered to them. But it has happened to them according to the true proverb, a dog returns to his own vomit, and, a sow, having washed, to her wallowing in the mire. Matthew 7. Reading from the New King James Version. You will know them by their fruits. Starting in verse 15. Beware of false prophets, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore by their fruits you will know them. Matthew 24. Reading from the New King James Version. Starting in verse 21. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning. 2 John. Reading from the New King James Version. Beware of Antichrist deceivers. Starting in verse 7. For many deceivers have gone out into the world who do not confess Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an Antichrist. Look to yourselves, that we do not lose those things we worked for, but that we may receive a full reward. Whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ does not have God. He who abides in the doctrine of Christ has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this doctrine, do not receive him into your house nor greet him, for he who greets him shares in his evil deeds. 1 John 4. Reading from the New King James Version. Love for God and one another. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God, and every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming, and is now already in the world. You are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are of the world. Therefore they speak as of the world, and the world hears them. We are of God. He who knows God hears us, he who is not of God does not hear us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. Titus 1. Reading from the New King James Version. The elder's task. Starting in verse 10. For there are many insubordinate, both idle talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole households, teaching things which they ought not, for the sake of dishonest gain. One of them, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. This testimony is true. Therefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men who turn from the truth. To the pure all things are pure, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving nothing is pure, but even their mind and conscience are defiled. They profess to know God, but in works they deny him, being abominable, disobedient, and disqualified for every good work.
Okay, now that's a lot of verses, and as I said, we're going to go through and break down how these relate in our next episode. But for a quick overview, the enemy is out there. Satan knows what's coming. Satan also knows the easiest way to get you to come to his side is a little bit at a time. It's easy to surrender on small things. Well, okay, fine. I know that's not right, but let's go ahead. It's okay. And he does it with such small, inconsequential things that most of us don't even think about. And the next thing you know, he's adding a little more, adding a little more. And just like a spy who is being, a government employee who's being turned by a spy, he turns you slowly, little bits at a time, until finally you have to come over on a big issue. And when that happens, you will know you're betraying the Lord. But you're going to do it anyway because, well, you've already done it. And he'll show you how you've done it. The other thing he's going to do is he makes your beliefs unpopular. You're going to be called a bigot, a racist. I mean, you will be called all sorts of names for standing up for your beliefs. If you refuse to accept the idea that homosexuals should be allowed to be married in your church, well, you're homophobic. You're transphobic. You're you insert whatever words you want, but the bottom line is they're going to come after you. And at the moment, all they're going to come after you is words. In some cases, remember, with the rise of BLM and Antifa, they have a tendency now to go to people's houses. If you don't support the views they want, they're liable to attack you. Now, keep this in mind as you are going through these verses before we get back together next episode, I should say, because it's going to happen. They're coming for you. You need to be prepared. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this longer episode. I kind of enjoyed going into a little more depth on some of the things. And I'm going to continue, as I said, doing 1 or 2, maybe 3 episodes a week of the longer episodes to where we get into a little more depth of the subject. In this one, it's continued into a second episode. So when you see it, it'll be listed as part 2. Till then, if you've enjoyed this episode, please hit that like button. Hit the share button. Send it to your friends. If you have not formed yourself a small group, form a small group and share it with all of them. Every member of your group should be seeing these shows so you are all on the same page. This would give you something to discuss. I'm not saying I should be the leader of your small group. What I am saying is your small group is there for you to help each other understand and break things down. By using your small group, if what I'm saying is wrong, you'll see it. Last but definitely not least, if you like the show, please, please, please hit the subscribe button. When we hit 1,000 subscribers, we can go live. When we have the ability to go live, we can have interesting discussions on different aspects of being prepared for the end of times and what all this means. Okay, if you want to actually support this ministry beyond just subscribing, you will see in a description of this episode a list of ways that you can support us. Also, if you go to the channel description, you'll see a listing for our Patreon account. Last but not least, in the episode description, you will see our email, which is waitinginlaodicea@gmail.com. And by the way, both of those, whether that's waiting in Laodicea or waiting n, the letter N, Laodicea, have both those email accounts so that if you can't remember which one it is, it's okay, it's both. Email me if you'd like some help, if you'd like some prayer, if you'd like somebody just to chat with. Please send us an email. I'm here for you. I want to thank you all for your time,